At dawn, the road looked quiet, almost peaceful, with frost clinging to the grass and a thin fog hanging low over the fields. An old man stood alone near the ditch, his back bent, hands rough from decades of working soil that never gave up easily, listening to a sound he knew too well. Engines. Heavy ones. Steel tracks grinding closer with every second. The kind of sound that makes your chest tighten and your mouth go dry. 6 German tanks rolled toward his village, confident and fast, certain nothing could stop them here. Their commanders relaxed in their hatches because they'd crushed every obstacle they'd faced in the past 3 weeks. The soldiers had laughed when they first saw him days earlier, an old farmer with dirt under his nails and a limp in his walk from an injury that never healed right. They called him useless, too slow, too weak to matter. Just another peasant who'd watch them pass through and then go back to his fields like nothing happened. He kept his head down and said nothing, because arguing wouldn't help, and time was running out. While they mocked him and joked about how easy the advance had been, he watched the land, measured the road with eyes that had studied every inch of it for 50 years, and made a quiet plan that no one else saw coming. The Germans had pushed deep into the countryside during the early weeks of the advance, and their armored units felt unstoppable. Villages fell without a fight, roads stayed open, and panzer crews trusted their speed and firepower to crush anything in their path. They'd learned to expect fear, surrender, and empty roads, not resistance from old men with farm tools and tired eyes. Tank commanders had stopped checking maps carefully because the pattern was always the same. Roll forward, take the village, move on. Victory had made them careless. The farmer's village sat near a narrow bend where the road dipped slightly, with soft ground on both sides and a shallow stream hidden by tall weeds that stayed wet even in dry seasons. He'd worked this land his whole life, plowing it, draining it, fixing it after every hard winter when frost heaved the ground and cracked foundations. He knew where the soil turned to mud after rain, where wheels sank and animals struggled, where water always found a way back to the surface no matter how many times you tried to redirect it, and where the bedrock sat just deep enough to anchor something heavy if you knew what you were doing. While soldiers passed through and laughed at him, he worked at night with 2 neighbors who trusted him, old friends who'd survived the last war and knew what German tanks could do to people who had nothing to fight back with. They didn't have weapons worth mentioning, no guns that could stop tanks, no explosives that the army had left behind, and no training manuals to guide them. What they had was wood from torn-down barns, iron scraps from broken plows and wagons, rope that had held hay bales for 20 years, and deep knowledge of the ground beneath their feet. So they built quietly and carefully, never rushing, never making noise that might draw attention from patrols. They dug trenches just deep enough to hide the trap, not deep enough to be seen from a distance by scouts or reconnaissance planes that sometimes flew overhead. They placed heavy logs beneath loose soil at angles that looked harmless, positioning them so the weight of a 30-ton tank would snap them downward instead of crushing them flat. They dragged broken farm equipment into position, sharpened steel edges on plow blades until they could puncture rubber and metal, and anchored everything with stakes driven deep into wet earth that would hold under pressure. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fast, but it was solid, and it used the land itself as a weapon in ways that no military manual had ever taught. If stories like this keep you listening, hit that subscribe button now because we share incredible World War II moments every week, and this one is only just getting started. The plan was simple but risky, because simple things often are when one mistake means everyone dies. Let the first tank reach the bend, where the road narrowed and drivers had to slow down to make the turn without sliding into the ditch. Let it roll forward with confidence, weight shifting from front to back as the nose dipped. The crew relaxed because they'd made this same maneuver 100 times on 100 different roads. Then let gravity, mud, and hidden steel do what guns couldn't. As the lead panzer reached the bend, the driver eased off the throttle just slightly, adjusting his line the way he'd been trained, probably thinking about breakfast or the next village. The ground gave way. The front of the tank dropped hard, the nose slamming down as the right track lost grip and slid into the soft earth that collapsed under 30 tons of German steel. Metal screamed. The engine roared, trying to power through. The tank stopped, wedged at an angle that made backing up impossible. The second tank tried to pull around it, swinging wide to avoid the ditch, the commander shouting orders through the radio about keeping formation and not getting stuck like the idiots in front of them. But its weight crushed the hidden logs, snapping them loose and dropping the hull into the same trap, mud spraying everywhere as tracks spun uselessly and the driver cursed. The road vanished beneath churning steel. Shouts echoed inside the tanks as crews tried to reverse, pulling levers and slamming gears, but momentum worked against them and the mud held tight. The third panzer braked too late and slammed into the second, the collision echoing across the fields as metal buckled and locked them together in a twisted pile of armor and smoke. The narrow road turned into a steel wall, blocking everything behind it and trapping the entire column in place. The fourth tank fired its gun blindly, panic overriding training, the blast shaking the trees and filling the air with dust and the smell of cordite, but it only made things worse. The recoil pushed it sideways into ground that hadn't been tested, and the soft earth swallowed one track, tipping the tank at a sharp angle that made the crew inside scramble to brace themselves. It couldn't move forward or back. By now, panic replaced confidence. The fifth and sixth tanks stopped short, engines idling, commanders trying to understand how a simple country road had turned into a trap that swallowed panzers whole. They hadn't been ambushed by enemy guns or mines, hadn't been hit by artillery or airstrikes. They'd been beaten by land and patience and an old man they'd called useless. The farmer watched from cover, heart pounding hard enough that he could feel it in his throat, hands shaking despite years of hard work that had made him steady through everything else. He knew the danger wasn't over, because trapped tanks could still fire, still kill, and angry soldiers would search for someone to blame when officers demanded answers. But time mattered, and every minute those tanks sat useless was a victory he never expected to see. A delay that might give others time to escape or prepare or simply live another day. German infantry moved forward cautiously, spreading out in textbook formation, rifles ready, eyes scanning for the enemy force they expected to find hiding in the trees and buildings. But confusion slowed them. Orders overlapped as different officers shouted different commands. Smoke blocked sight lines. Junior officers argued about how to free the tanks while senior commanders called for help over radios that crackled with bad signals and questions nobody could answer clearly. The advance stalled completely on that quiet road. Hours passed, and with them came reports of enemy forces nearby, Allied units that had been retreating but now saw an opportunity. The trapped panzers became targets instead of threats, hit later by artillery and air attacks once their position was known and marked on maps. None of the 6 tanks ever reached the village. They stayed right where the old farmer wanted them, broken and useless and blocking the road for units that came after. When soldiers later asked how it happened, some claimed it was bad luck, others blamed poor driving or faulty intelligence about the road conditions, and a few quietly admitted they'd underestimated the locals who knew the land better than any map could show. No one mentioned the old farmer by name in official reports, because admitting that would have meant admitting weakness, admitting that an army could be stopped by people they dismissed as harmless. The farmer never called himself a hero. He went back to his fields after the fighting moved on, fixing the land again, filling holes, and straightening fences torn up by tanks that never should have been there. He'd lost neighbors, sleep, and years of peace, but he'd gained proof that knowledge and patience could stop even steel monsters when you understood the ground beneath your feet better than the men driving over it. By the end of the war, thousands of tanks lay wrecked across Europe, destroyed by guns, bombs, and other tanks in battles that made the history books. But some were beaten by something simpler: mud, wood, iron, and people who refused to believe they were helpless just because others said they were. That morning at the bend in the road didn't change the whole war, but it changed everything for that village and the men who thought it would fall without a fight. 6 panzers didn't reach their goal, and an old farmer proved that courage doesn't always look loud or strong, doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a gun. Stories like his remind us that World War II wasn't only decided by factories and generals, but by ordinary people who used what they had and what they knew when it mattered most. Sometimes, the smartest weapon isn't a gun. It's understanding the ground beneath your feet and having the patience to use it right. Thanks for watching WW2 Vault. If you want more true stories about unexpected moments that shaped the war, make sure you're subscribed, because there are many more waiting to be told.